我们都知道共同嗜好是很好做连结的主题，但其实就算共同嗜好相同的价值观不同，也无法保证适合一起共事。那要如何透过对谈来有效地了解对方的经验、价值观以及共同目标呢？ Let's dive in. Hello, 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast.I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. This month, we've been talking a lot about how to build more weak social ties.And a lot of that comes down to how you interact with people in a very short amount of time. And a key skill related to that is how do you find common ground or identified shared values with the person that you can quickly show that you understand and build a connection with them? Well, way back in episode 160, we actually talked to Vincent Koiga about how did he build all of these relationships when he was posted in the US. And we wanted to dive a little bit back into that today to look at what are different things you can do to really quickly build a connection and find common ground with someone in a short amount of time.
所以在100集之前，我们跟口一哥就讲到了，那个时候口一哥他特别喜欢的一种方式，跟人家做连接的方式，也就是 really expanding his interest, right? He talked about how he learned how to cook and he took a lot of different classes. 所以这个让他在工作当中能够很快的跟人家找到这个所谓的 common ground. 那我觉得在那个 episode 我们比较讲到是 common interest. 那今天呢，在我们这个单元，我们想要 kind of expand the common interest a little bit more, right? So we talk about common grounds. 所以这个 common grounds 可能是共同的嗜好、共同的 experience、共同的目标，甚至是共同的价值观。
One of the distinctions we wanted to make between common interests or common ground or common values is understanding someone's underlying reason for doing something. So it's actually very easy to have common interests, but you may have very different motivations for why you do something. So for example, is maybe both sides really like gaming, but one person could be a very hardcore gamer. Someone else could just be something that they do in between meetings, like for 5 minutes on their phone.You could say their common interest is gaming, but how they approach that and how deep into it is very different. So one of the things that we wanted to jump into is how do you start to separate out, oh, we just have a common interest, to actually finding how close is that interest and is this truly a common ground?
Yeah, because it was definitely a journey for me because I liked to shop. 那以前大家都认为嘛，女生嘛就喜欢 shopping. So if I like to shop, you like to shop, let's go shopping together. But oh my God, that's really a bad assumption. 因为我们 shopping 的方式都非常的不一样. Like the way I do it, it's very quick, very goal-oriented, in and out.That's it. 但是有很多人喜欢 shop for hours, you know, 慢慢来比价钱. That is totally not my style. Even though we may share common interests, but the way we shop is completely different. If you put us together, then I will die and I will suffer so much because I do not like to compare prices and waiting around.
Yeah, another great example of where this separates for a lot of people is, let's say, vacation. Oh, you know, I love to take a beach vacation or I love to travel for vacation. Yeah. On the surface level, a lot of people will be like, yeah, I love traveling for vacation. Very few people are going to disagree with that. But let's take an example. In my family, my mom and I like to vacation the same way. When we say beach vacation, that literally means like you go to some kind of resort that has a beach or a pool and you sit by that beach or pool with a book, and that's it. That's a beach vacation. But growing up, my dad was always someone who's like, okay, if we're going to travel somewhere, we got to do all the things. Like, we need to see everything. We need to go everywhere. I have a very strong feeling, at least like a lot of the Taiwanese families I know in Taiwan, my good family friends that I, first came to Taiwan and lived in Chiayi, when they say vacation, that is like, we are going to drive up and down this island. We are going to see every famous tourist site that is possible, and we're going to do all that in a day. So like when my mom came to visit, again, she and I are the same. Let's go somewhere and relax and do nothing. But then my Taiwan family, this, family friend that we've known forever, they'd be like, great, your mom is here. Let's plan a vacation. And I knew, like, I would have to protect my mom from that. I'm like, I don't think she needs to travel that much. Because they would plan it out, be like, okay, we're going to start in Chiayi. We're going to drive to Tainan. We're going to see this temple. And then we're going to go up to, Sun Moon Lake. And then we're going to do these things. And so that's where she's like, vacation, travel, sure. But common ground, no.
Absolutely. And that's why a lot of people said that couples tend to crumble, their relationship will crumble after traveling together because everyone just has a very different way to travel. So I think that translates to literally anything, any common interest, right? So that's why 我觉得在这个单元呢，我们就是想要来好好的聊一下什么叫所谓的共同嗜好，那什么叫共同价值观，共同的这些目标，才能让我们在比较短时间内就能够建立这些弱连接。
A few ways that you can really actively engage someone in conversation and identify whether you have a shared interest or a shared common ground / shared value. The first thing is this really comes down to active listening. When you listen to someone's statement, if you just take it at the surface value, it is very easy to stay at common interests, right? If I come up and be like, oh, this person lived in the US for a while. As a foreigner, I get this a lot where someone's like, oh, this person went to school in the US. And so that's an easy like, oh, great. Where did you stay in the US? And now I'm someone who grew up, went to school, worked in the Midwest. If someone's like spent a lot of time on the East Coast, both in the US, yes, but very different experiences, right? So if I just stay there and be like, oh, so where were you? In Sherry's case, it's like New York. That's a very different pace of life. So if I just left it as like, oh, the US, like, how did you feel about it? What was it like for you? Right? I can have a quick conversation, but we may not find a lot of shared values or shared experiences.
And another example, I would say, if you're just looking at the sentence, if someone said, oh, I have learned salsa dancing for 10 years. 那如果有些人他可能是就是 listening 而已，那他可能听到是 salsa dancing. And they may reply, oh, I tried that once, but I didn't like it. There's a lot of these kind of a conversation, right? 但是这 person A 就讲说 oh, okay. Like, it's hard to continue that dialogue. But if for active listening, you may pick up the fact, 10 years. Wow. So like, how did you become so persistent? That's the value, right? So you can actually pick out the value from active listening.
So you may run into that where someone's like, oh, you like dance? This person likes dance, but you did hip hop and that person did salsa for 10 years. The interest may divide. But as you just said, this is a really great place to jump into a conversation and be like, oh, I've really dedicated myself to hip hop dance, but I never could find a way to just pursue other things. What keeps you going?
Yeah.
Right? So you may find some common ground on what's your motivation for dance. Is it exercise? Is it the community? Is it fun? So dance is a very surface interest, but those values will be underneath it when you ask things like, oh, what keeps you motivated? How have you stuck with it for so long? Have you thought about other types of dance or what brings you back to this?
Yeah. 所以我觉得有时候如果你觉得你常讲话常常回人家话然后人家好像也没有办法来继续这个话题的话 maybe it's because that the conversation is just not deep enough, right? It stays on the surface. 比如说我真的如果同样的 conversation 我讲说我学这个5到10年，人家只回我说 Yeah, 我试过，但我很讨厌。Like how do you continue that conversation? Yeah, and I had a lot of those conversations with people. Active listening is definitely, I think, one of the key things in terms of finding that common grounds. Well, a little tease, this is something we'll really dive into in our EP Insight episode.
So in EP Insights, we actually want to spend a little more time looking at when you're doing active listening, how do you separate out understanding the facts of a conversation, the feelings associated with a conversation, and someone's true values. But jumping into the next piece, and we were touching on this with the first one of active listening, is how do you look for shared experiences? If you stay on the surface with our interests, we may not have a lot of shared experiences on the surface. Back to the dances, if you're a hip-hop dancer versus someone who is a tango dancer, you may not really find those shared experiences because one also tends to be more of a solo activity, another is definitely a paired activity at its base. It's almost a requirement. So how do you find shared experiences and have that conversation? Actually, recently, I had a very good conversation related to this where I found a clip of one of our clients in a piano competition. And he's now in his 40s. And I had a chance to have a conversation with him about it. And we actually had very similar backgrounds where both of us played for like 10 plus years when we were kids and then really never touched a piano after that. And then I just brought it up, you know, like, oh, I saw you did this thing. I always thought about getting back into it. And he was like, well, honestly, I just picked it up again like 2 years ago during the pandemic. You know, this is something I had always done, but never really excelled at. And I wanted to find a way to make myself comfortable performing in front of people. And he and I were able to get into this really interesting conversation because it wasn't just like, oh, he's been playing for the last 30 years. It was actually something both of us had shared that experience as kids, and he had found a new reason to pick it back up. And so we were able to get into this really interesting conversation about where would a skill like piano fit into our lives as adults.
Yeah, so you're not just staying on the surface where, oh, it's music or piano playing. It's more about his needs to overcome the challenge or overcome the fear of performing in front of people. 那我觉得这个你就可以又更了解他是从哪里的出发，还有这个人他是什么样的一个人. So like you know more about this person.
Right. And this was one of those situations where he and I were having a conversation about this while waiting for coffee to be made. So this wasn't a conversation that took us half an hour to complete. It was just like, hey, by the way, I found this video of you on YouTube. And then what's going on there? And then we had this really good connection for like 5 or 10 minutes. When our coffee was ready, then we both went to a meeting upstairs. And so this is a great example of, you know, how do you quickly build rapport with someone in a short amount of time, but by finding one topic where that started as, let's say, a shared interest, but we found a way to make common ground. And so the third thing on our list is related to that last one, shared experiences. And what this helped identify was a shared value. Because I found that in our conversation, he was not doing it for the sake of just getting back into it. He actually wanted to push himself to get better at publicly performing. It was like, I give speeches in front of large crowds all the time, but I have a lot of anxiety around performing in front of a lot of people. And so he wanted to find a consistent way to practice something. And so that meant joining piano competitions as an adult, where maybe everyone else in the piano competition is like a teenager. But this actually created a shared value from the sense of this is something we've preached all the time with language learning in the podcast, which is this is not theoretical. If you are not going out and using these communication or language techniques, you're not going to improve. And so he had a very similar philosophy, which is it's not me just learning piano on my own. It's actually about finding an outlet to force myself to kind of challenge this anxiety. And that was just about doing it over and over again until he was comfortable with it. And so this is something we connected on, which is if you want to learn something new, you cannot learn it in isolation. You need to go find a way to almost learn in public.
And to me, what I pick up on is that he's very persistent and he's not afraid of stepping out of his comfort zone, right? 觉得这个部分的话，也就是你可以从对话上面，你可以了解到更多这个人他的一个价值观。那你也可以从这上面了解他可能在工作当中是怎么样来 perform 的，他可能接下了一个新的挑战，他可能会怎么样去调整自己。那如果这个人正好是你的老板、上司、主管的话 ，perfect, because you can kind of, from these conversation, you could kind of predict how he or she would take on a new project or how did they face a new challenge as well.
So what you can really see in this episode is that evolution of how we go from sharing common interests to actually finding shared values. And what we want to emphasize is that step-by-step process. Number one, active listening, really listening not just to the surface statement that they made, but picking out parts of that sentence to understand, oh, what is a good follow-up question? What is a good thing to dive into? And that allows you to look for shared experiences. You and I may have a common interest, but we may not have a shared experience around it. So how do you ask questions where we can find shared experiences? And through these shared experiences, you get to that last piece, which is identifying values that you may hold in common.
所以刚刚 Nick 有讲到，我们就在对谈当中利用很积极聆听的方式，不只了解到对方的嗜好，我们也可以了解我们共同的这些经验跟共同的价值观，能够在比较短的时间内建立这些弱连结。那当然这些弱连结有可能也会变成你的强连结。那在我们明天也就是 EP Insights 的第二个单元呢，我们就会分享给大家一些不同的activity 还有方法去如何积极聆听，而且听到这一些很重要的 information. So, I hope you guys stay tuned for our EP Insights tomorrow.
And continue joining us all this month as we dive more into keys to building weak social ties, both on the main podcast and also within EP Insights. If you have any feedback or anything you want to share about your own ways of building out these weak social ties or finding common ground with people, we would love to hear from you. You can find us at Facebook, Executive Plus, Instagram, Communication R&D, or feel free to email us through any of the links below. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.